Poor, abandoned alien beauty whispered, "I'll warm your bed, human. Just don't leave me." Calderas, 6 had long since stopped pretending to be a place for the living. It spun in cold silence around a dead gas giant, its once breathable atmosphere now a whisper of vapor and static charged particles that clung to the torn remains of its weather domes. Thorn 9 was one of the last stations still online. If flickering lights, unreliable power, and frost-choked corridors could be called online. The place had been half abandoned after the isotope war ended, then repurposed into a listening post, then forgotten again when the funding dried up and someone somewhere quietly admitted the obvious. No one was listening anymore. Derek knew all of this, and still he stayed. He didn't like to think of himself as exiled. That would have required someone to care enough to banish him. No, he came here willingly. Calderas didn't ask questions. It didn't accuse. It just swallowed you in snow and silence and let your mistakes freeze where no one could find them. He liked that. But even here, in the storm's hollow heart, solitude didn't last. The call came on his 3rd morning of the ion surge, just a flicker in the motion grid. He was already suited, halfway across the southern ridge, to reset a failing relay tower. The interference was chewing through their sensor grid, and without it, the outpost would be blind. The alert was faint, a blur of heat bloom where there shouldn't have been anything but snow and windless silence. Derek blinked behind his helmet visor, adjusting the thermal lens. There, near the auxiliary exhaust shaft, movement. He paused, heart ticking louder than the distant hum of his portable heater pack. Calderas didn't have native fauna. Nothing that big moved without artificial power or purpose. The screen refreshed. This time he saw her. A shape, not mechanical, not human. She was collapsed beside the steam vent, knees drawn halfway to her chest, one arm frozen stiff beneath her. Her skin, where visible through frost, shimmered faintly, deep blue with hints of opal violet. It pulsed gently like a bioluminescent bruise beneath the ice. Long white hair hung in wet, tangled strands, rimed with frost that glittered in the low sun's arc. She looked half-carved from a glacier herself, more sculpture than life. But her chest, barely visible, rose and fell. Alive. Barely. Derek ran. The snow didn't fight him. It consumed him. His boots broke through the crust with every step, his lungs burning with the forced exertion. The emergency medkit bounced against his hip as he pushed forward, cursing aloud into the storm, knowing no one could hear. He dropped to his knees beside her, his gloved fingers already activating the heat capsule in his coat lining. Her eyes flickered open at the touch, just barely. Not focus, not presence, just instinct. They were large, impossibly large, shaped like falling teardrops, their color a watery quartz, framed by lashes so pale they were nearly translucent. Her lips were cracked, blue-gray at the edges. Her body bore symmetrical bruising across the joints, ankles, wrists, upper arms, like machinery had held her too tightly for too long. And the marks on her wrists, thin, uniform, deeply indented. Not from struggle, from design. She'd been bound. Precisely. Repeatedly. He reached for her face to check her temperature. She flinched barely, but not from fear. From routine. Her gaze locked on his helmet, and something passed through her expression, a pre-programmed flicker of submission. Then, softly, brokenly, she whispered, "I'll warm your bed, human, just don't leave me." The words weren't plea. They weren't seduction. They were ritual. Too smooth. Too practiced. A phrase ground down by repetition until it meant nothing. Her voice stuttered on the final syllables, like even her lips hesitated before finishing the script. And then her eyes rolled back. Derek froze. That phrase, it didn't belong out here. Not in this lifeless hell. And certainly not in the mouth of a dying alien woman whose body was shutting down his arms. His stomach clenched. Anger stirred, but not at her. Never at her. At the system that had taught someone to say that. That had made survival sound like a transaction. Gently, carefully, he pulled the heat-lined coat from his own shoulders and wrapped it around her. Her skin, despite the frostbite, was warmer than it should have been, almost feverish. Amphibious? Some kind of metabolic adaptation? There was no time for questions. He slid one arm under her knees, the other beneath her shoulders. She was longer than he expected, taller than a human woman, but slight. Dehydrated. Starving. Every motion made his muscles strain. She wasn't light, just limp, unresisting, like someone who didn't expect to be held. Her hair clung to his chest as he carried her through the snow, its ends flicking in the windless void like pale ribbons. His visor began fogging from the combined heat of her body and his own. The outpost's distant bulk, half sunk into the ridge, its surface domes sagging beneath layers of permafrost, looked like a sunken relic from another time. Pale green emergency beacons blinked faintly through the whiteout, like tired eyes. Each step was a promise, each breath a prayer. She didn't move again, but her head at some point dropped to his shoulder, not in comfort. In collapse, Derek didn't let go. He reached the airlock with legs trembling from fatigue, his back soaked with sweat that froze before it could evaporate. Inside the corridor, the heat struck like a punch. He staggered to the med bay, kicked open the manual override, and lowered her to the diagnostic bed. Warm light buzzed overhead. The med interface stuttered online, trying to parse her biology. Not human, not registered, no records. The system flagged her with a red biohazard tag. Derek ignored it. He placed an electrolyte capsule between her lips, gently coaxing her jaw to move, hoping reflexes would do the rest. She swallowed. The first small victory. Then he sat down beside the bed, gloves still on, blood pumping hot with something colder than fury. Something slower. He looked at her, this strange, luminous creature left to die in the snow, with a script on her lips that no living soul should ever be taught. She had survived, but someone had tried to make sure she didn't. He didn't know who she was. Not yet. But whoever had sent her to die out there, they would never touch her again. Not here. Not while he still breathed. And for the first time in years, Derek knew what to do with his heart again. The station didn't breathe. It pulsed. Not like a living thing, but like a dying one, old and slow and failing. Heat came in broken rhythms through the ductwork, not constant, but coughing in and out, the way the lungs of Thor 9 had done since the last maintenance cycle passed it over. Derek sat in silence beside the bed, sleeves rolled halfway, arms resting on his thighs, posture coiled and unmoving. The med bay glowed in that dull synthetic orange, its sterile edges dulled by age. Ice crystals beaded at the corners of the inner window, trembling as the temperature fought to hold. He hadn't left her side. Not once. 20 hours had passed since he carried her in. 20 hours of reading vitals the system didn't recognize, watching a body it couldn't categorize try to heal itself. She hadn't spoken since that one line. "I'll warm your bed, human. Just don't leave me." He'd replayed it in his head too many times already. It wasn't fear that stuck with him. It wasn't the content. It was the tone. Flat. Automatic. Too smooth. She hadn't meant it. Not as a person would. She'd said it like a doll might, with the last breath in her throat and no memory of consent. That was what turned his stomach. Now she lay beneath 3 layers of insulation, wrapped in his coat, emergency thermal blankets, and a soft fleece from the rec ward. The only sound in the room was the occasional flutter of steam from the wall vents and the click-click-click of Derek's right foot tapping an unconscious rhythm against the base of the bed. Then her hand moved. Not far, just a twitch beneath the blankets. A tremor that almost escaped his notice. He leaned in slowly, not daring to startle her. Her fingers uncurled, drifting across the fabric like sea grass in a current. Where her eyelids fluttered, Derek forgot to breathe. Her eyes opened without fully focusing. Wide, otherworldly, like moons that never blinked. The color of pale glaciers in ash. She blinked once, slow and heavy. Then again, faster. And then she saw him. The change in her posture was immediate. Her muscles tensed, not to run, but to submit. Her back straightened. Her arms went rigid at her sides. She didn't cry out. She didn't flinch. She simply began to pull the blanket down. Derek rose from the chair before his brain caught up to his body. Don't, he said, voice low. Her movements froze mid-gesture. You don't need to do that. She looked at him, and for a heartbeat, her expression didn't register confusion or shame. It was something worse. Silence. Like no one had ever told her that before. I said I would warm your bed, she said at last. No hesitation. No emotion. A phrase memorized long ago. He stepped closer, his face soft but firm. You're not a thing, he said. You're not here for that. Her brows twitched faintly. A micro-expression, barely perceptible. She reached for the blanket again, but this time, she pulled it up, tight, up to her throat. Then she turned slightly toward the wall, eyes closing, but not in sleep. In retreat. Derek stepped back, sat again, waited. The seconds passed like dripping water. She didn't speak again, but her shoulders didn't tremble. Her breathing didn't spike. Somewhere in her body, something had recognized safety. That was enough. He stood, crossed to the console, and activated the hydration module. A faint mechanical whir sounded as a small pouch of heated water dispensed. He returned, crouched beside the bed, and held it out, not touching her, just setting it where her fingers could find it. You need a drink, he said. It's just water. She didn't move. Then, slowly her hand emerged. She took the pouch, sniffed it, paused, then drank. Too fast. The coughing fit was sharp, her body convulsing with each choke. Derek moved without thinking, supporting her shoulders with one hand, steadying the pouch with the other. She didn't fight him, but she didn't look at him either. When the fit passed, she leaned back wordlessly, allowing herself to be eased into the pillows. A sheen of sweat had formed across her temple, just under the hairline. Her hair, gods! Derek hadn't even noticed it until now in detail. White, not human gray, not bleached, not synthetic. White like the inside of a pearl. Luminous. Long strands feathered around her face, half wet still from melted frost. Strands stuck to her neck, her cheek. She didn't brush them away. Your skin is stabilizing, he said, not sure why he spoke. You're warming up. She didn't answer, but her lips parted slightly, as if to breathe easier. Her body, for the first time, wasn't braced against some unseen impact. Derek sat back. He let the quiet settle around them again, like snow on a roof. After a while, he stood, walked across the room, and dimmed the lights. I'll be nearby, he said. No answer. But just before he left, he glanced over his shoulder. She had shifted onto her side, barely, but it wasn't the movement itself that froze him. It was her fingers. One hand, still trembling, rested palm out on the blanket's edge. Not an invitation, not a gesture of affection, but it was a signal. The kind a creature might make in the wild. Not to say come closer, but to say, I'm not afraid if you do. Derek stood there a moment longer, then nodded once, unseen, and stepped into the dark. The station's artificial daylight had shifted by the time she spoke again. It was her third conscious cycle, 3 rotations of silence, warmth, and carefully spaced hydration. Derek had watched her relearn her body in small gestures. The way she tested her fingers against the blanket's edge, how she tensed when doors hissed open, how she never fully uncurled her legs beneath the sheets. Always half ready to flee, even when her eyes stayed closed. She didn't ask questions, didn't speak, but she listened. He caught her watching him once, through the mirrored panel above the med console. Just for a second, her reflection staring back at his bowed head while he typed a maintenance log with 2 tired fingers. When their eyes met, she looked away. Now, in the soft light of the common galley, she sat across from him in borrowed thermal layers, oversized and awkward on her frame. Her posture was still guarded, knees drawn up slightly, hands resting in her lap. She didn't lean against the wall. She didn't relax. But she was sitting. That was something. Between them, a bowl of hot broth steamed gently, filled with carefully rehydrated protein curls and thin strips of preserved kelp. Derek had made it himself, what passed for comfort food on a dead moon. The station's food printer barely functioned anymore, but warmth helped. When she reached out, her fingers shook. She brought the spoon to her lips too fast, and some of the liquid spilled over. She froze, wrist caught midair, as if expecting punishment. "Take your time," Derek said gently. Her gaze flicked to his face. Measured, still unsure. She tried again, slower this time. The broth touched her tongue, and something changed in her expression. A flicker of recognition, not of the taste itself, but of the heat. She swallowed, closed her eyes, and took another bite. Not hunger, not survival, pleasure. He saw it in the subtle release of her shoulders, the quiet exhale through her nose. "You didn't eat for days, did you?" he asked. She looked down. Her voice, when it came, was low and soft. "There was snow. I licked it. Anything else?" "Bark. From a pipe." Derek winced. "I thought I was going to die," she added, matter of fact. There was no dramatization in her tone, no appeal for sympathy, just observation, a line on a report. He set his cup down. His throat felt suddenly tight. "Do you know how you got here?" "To Calderis." She hesitated, then nodded once. "I escaped." He waited, but she didn't elaborate. So he changed tack. "What's your name?" Her eyes met his, and something old passed between them, caution and calculation. "They call me 243 Beta, but I remember being called Nyari." He repeated the name quietly. "Nyari." She didn't smile, but she looked a little less tense. He didn't press further. Not yet. Instead, he reached for a small cloth and wiped a bit of broth that had dribbled down her hand. She froze. Her eyes didn't leave his. He stopped halfway, not touching skin, just holding the cloth in the air. "May I?" he asked. She studied his hand as if it were a weapon, or maybe a tool she'd never seen used properly. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. He wiped her skin carefully, as if she might break. Her skin wasn't cold anymore. It was soft now, warm, real. She didn't thank him. But when he moved away, she didn't flinch. "I thought you were going to touch me," she said after a pause. "I did." "No," she clarified, eyes steady. "Not to clean me. To use me." Derek looked at her for a long moment. The silence was thick between them. "Has anyone ever touched you just to help?" he asked. She didn't answer. That told him everything. He leaned back against the opposite bench. Well, they were wrong. All of them. Nyari tilted her head. "You're different." He shrugged. "I used to teach people how to be good to each other, how to build trust. I failed." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "How do you fail at that?" "I broke someone's trust. A long time ago. I tried to fix it, but some things don't go back together." The heat from the food steamed softly between them. "I don't think I was built to trust," she said. He smiled faintly. "Then we're even." She glanced down at her bowl, now nearly empty, and lifted the last bite to her mouth. She chewed thoughtfully, and for a moment, there was peace. Real peace. Quiet. Honest. But it didn't last. A soft chirp came from the console in the corridor, a minor proximity alert. Routine. Probably debris from the storm, or a shifting ice shelf. But Derek stood instinctively. "Stay here," he said. "I'll check it." Nyari watched him go. She didn't follow, but she didn't hide either. And when he returned a few minutes later, brushing snow from his jacket, she was still there, still sitting, her eyes half closed, arms wrapped loosely around her knees. Waiting. As he passed by, she spoke again. Not loudly. "Derek." He turned. "You don't have to stay near me all the time." "I want to," he said. She looked at him then with something like confusion. Not distrust, not fear, just disbelief. And then she nodded once, slow and quiet. That night, for the first time, she fell asleep without turning to face the wall. And for the first time, Derek didn't dream of silence. The first time Nyari touched Derek without flinching, it wasn't dramatic. There were no alarms, no storm outside, no brush with death. It happened while he was making tea. She had walked into the galley silently, as she always did. She moved like memory, barefoot, soundless, shaped by a life spent stepping lightly through threat. He hadn't heard her come in until her hand reached over his to steady the cup he was pouring. His grip had trembled only slightly. The kettle was heavy, the heat old and uneven. She said nothing, but her palm covered the back of his hand, steadying it with unthinking precision. Then she pulled away, but she didn't leave. He turned, heart thudding louder than it should have been, and found her watching the steam curl between them, not avoiding his gaze, not demanding anything either. Just there. It was the first time she didn't act like she owed him her body for kindness. They sat in the corner of the galley, sharing warmth from mismatched mugs. Through the thick window beyond, the surface of Calderis, six stretched into frozen oblivion. Jagged cliffs and hollow ice valleys, windless and gray under the soft glow of the distant gas giant. The moon had never known spring. Only silence. Nyari sipped slowly. She didn't seem to mind the bitterness. I remember salt, she said. The ocean where I was born wasn't warm, but it was alive. It moved around us, like breathing. Derek didn't interrupt. I was raised in a birthing colony, she continued, voice calm. Iskari women are designed to carry hybrids. We're bred for compatibility, intelligence, physiology, temperament. I was engineered to gestate multiple genetic profiles and to adapt for comfort. Her tone was flat, but her eyes were distant. Somewhere else. They kept us below, in chambers shaped like petals. We weren't allowed to speak unless spoken to. Attachment was considered a flaw. Derek's knuckles tightened around his cup. I wept after the first birth, she said. They called it a reaction, a hormonal spike. They corrected it with hormone suppression and neural conditioning. Then reassigned me. She paused. Her hands, which had once shaken with every movement, were still now. Perfectly still. The second time, I didn't cry. I didn't feel anything. Not until they brought in the child's buyer, and she asked if the infant smiled yet. I remember thinking, how could she care about a smile, but not about me? Derek looked at her, and for the first time, she held his gaze. I asked for the child's name. Not loudly, not emotionally. Just asked. And they punished you, he said, not as a question. She nodded. They said my attachments made me unviable. They scheduled me for full reconditioning. But you escaped. Her silence was answer enough. He exhaled slowly, like steam from a cracked vent. I used to teach xenocultural intimacy, he said quietly. Back on Terra. I was good at it. I believed in it. I believed in empathy, real empathy. Understanding the soul behind the structure. I led the program. I trained diplomats. I even consulted for off-world trauma therapy centers. Nyari tilted her head. What changed? One of my case files leaked. A patient who confided in me during a trust simulation. Her story. It wasn't meant for public eyes. It went viral. There was outrage, even though I hadn't shared it myself. What was my interview? My voice asking the questions. They said I had exploited her. Nyari blinked slowly. Did you? No, Derek said. But I didn't stop it either. I should have protected her story better. Instead, I buried my career and volunteered for the outposts. Places like this. Places where no one asks questions, because no one cares. Nyari looked down into her cup. And now you're here, she said. Now I'm here. She reached out again, not suddenly, not hesitantly, and placed 2 fingers against his wrist. I don't want to be studied, she said. I don't want to study you, he replied. I just want you to be safe. Her fingers remained. That's not what safety used to feel like, she whispered. They sat like that, hand against wrist, the station humming quietly around them. No music, no conversation, just breathing and the hum of machines built long before either of them were broken. Later, they lay side by side in the recovery chamber, not touching, not speaking, just near. The station had grown colder again. The power grids were under stress from the storm's long tail, and the secondary heating systems could only sustain a few rooms at a time. The medical suite was one. The sleeping pod was not. He'd offered the bed. She had refused, not out of fear, but pride. So now they shared the bench bed, thin, wide enough for 2 if they didn't move. Neither did. The quiet stretched long. She broke it. I'm not a person in most places. Derek turned his head toward her in the dark. You are here, he said. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything. She nodded. He heard it in the way her breath shifted, not in words. Then he felt her head settle against his shoulder, not firmly, just enough to feel the weight of it. You're warm, she murmured. You're alive, he answered. For the first time, neither of them dreamed of the past. only the shared rhythm of now. The alarm sounded like a low animal growl, muffled and distant, barely audible over the storm chewing at Thorn Nine's upper decks. Derek jolted upright in the narrow med bench, heart already racing. Beside him, Nyari stirred. Not from fear, but from instinct. Eyes wide, breath already controlled. She was always ready. It's the perimeter grid, Derek muttered, standing quickly. Outer sensors just triggered. Could be another ice shift. Nyari didn't move. She watched him quietly as he slipped on his boots and coat. There was no panic in her gaze, but something deeper, something patient, quiet, and alert. He stopped by the door. Stay here. Lock from inside. But she rose anyway. I can help, she said. He hesitated. Just a breath. Then nodded. They moved down the corridor in silence. Thor Nine's emergency lights pulsed gently along the floor, casting long shadows on the silver walls. Pipes ticked overhead as the heating grid rerouted power. It wasn't dangerous yet, but it was close. And out here, close was enough to kill. The alert beacon pulsed again as they reached the command alcove. Derek tapped into the camera feed, expecting snow. Instead, he saw a figure. Not hers. Not human. A recon drone. Court-made. Sleek, angular, with narrow sensor stalks and scanning filaments like whiskers. It hovered silently above the ridge, observing the thermal vent where Nyari had fallen. It wasn't broadcasting. It wasn't requesting contact. It was hunting. Derek's hands hovered over the console. The drone hadn't locked onto the station. Not yet. They're looking for you, he said. Nyari was behind him. He didn't turn, but he heard her breath catch. Just once. Then stillness. I knew they would, she said. They'll scan for biosignatures. Trace any chemical anomalies. He glanced at the diagnostics readout. Your heat signature is still spiking higher than mine. My body's adapting, she murmured. The cold triggers cellular acceleration. And that makes you easier to find, he replied. She stepped beside him, her shoulder brushing his. Unintentional, maybe, but neither moved away. We can't let them see you. He didn't ask if she wanted to stay. He didn't ask if she wanted to run. She already had. Instead, they moved fast, coordinated. Derek rerouted the station's heat exhaust. Nyari helped him realign the vent towers to redirect emissions deeper into the cliffs. It was dirty work. Cold. But neither of them hesitated. At one point, she slipped, just for a second, on an ice slick panel. Derek caught her before she fell. His hand closed around her wrist, then slid to her forearm. Skin against skin. She froze. He did too, not out of discomfort, but because something passed between them, like static or recognition. She was the first to move. Not away, not with fear, just to steady herself. They kept working. By the time they finished, the drone had passed, drifting eastward, its scan incomplete. Not gone, but not inside. Back in the station, Derek sank into the chair near the main relay. Exhausted, covered in cold sweat. Nyari stood over him, still and quiet. Her eyes flicked over the readout, then to him. You were afraid, she said. I still am. Not for you. He looked up. No, not for me. She knelt beside him. Not low, not submissive. Just close. You don't know what they'd do if they found me. I know enough. She studied his face, lines softened by fatigue, eyes red-rimmed from cold and lack of sleep. Her hand lifted. He almost flinched, but didn't. She touched his cheek with her fingertips, barely there. Like tracing the outline of something she didn't quite believe. Your skin feels like memory, she whispered. He didn't ask what she meant. He just closed his eyes for a moment, letting her touch settle into his bones. Then he opened them and looked at her. Not her injuries, not at her origin, not at what she'd been made to be. Just her. I'm not used to being seen like that, he said quietly. I wasn't made to see anyone. Silence hung between them. Then, slowly, without planning it, he leaned forward, just enough to meet her halfway. She didn't pull back. Their foreheads touched first, then their lips. Tentative, gentle. The kiss wasn't fire. It wasn't desperation. It was breath. It was choice. When they pulled apart, she smiled, small, uncertain, but real. I didn't think humans kissed like that. We don't. Not usually. Then what was that? Mine. She looked at him a moment longer, then nodded. They didn't kiss again. Not that night. Not out of shyness. Out of reverence. Later, when the storm quieted and the drone drifted out of range, they slept again, this time with her head resting on his chest, one hand over his heart. Not because he asked, not because she owed him, because she wanted to know the rhythm of something that didn't belong to the people who built her. And he held her like that, quietly, steadily, thinking, for the first time in years, about a future that wasn't empty. Because in the silence, she'd whispered something she'd never said before. Not I'll warm your bed. Not don't leave me. But stay. Because I want you to. The storm broke that night. Not with violence, but with silence, so complete it pressed against the windows like breath held too long. Outside, the wind had stilled. The air shimmered with suspended frost, unbroken for the first time in weeks. Derek stood by the main viewport, one hand resting on the chilled edge of the frame, eyes fixed on the glowing edge of Calderis's horizon. The gas giant loomed like a cracked pupil in the sky, orange and immense, veiled in slow-moving clouds that curled like sleeping serpents. Behind him, Nyari slept. Not because he asked her to, not because she felt she had to, but because her body trusted him enough to collapse. That, more than anything, felt like a miracle. The drone hadn't returned, but they both knew the silence wouldn't last. She stirred in the blanket, stretching slowly before sitting up, pale hair cascading like liquid metal over her shoulders. She blinked at the cold air, then stood barefoot and crossed him. He didn't turn. They'll come next, she said, quiet as breath. The drone was just a scout. I know. They won't knock. I know that, too. She stepped beside him, close enough that her warmth brushed his skin. Her voice dropped lower. You should leave. While you still can. They won't chase you. He turned, finally. I'm not leaving you. I'm not worth your life. You don't get to decide that. Her mouth parted. A protest, silent. But never came. Instead, she reached out, slow and uncertain, and touched his chest with both hands. I wasn't made to be chosen, she said. I wasn't made to care, he replied. She looked up at him then, eyes deep as the sea floor. But you do. I do. The words settled between them. And then, before either could say more, the station lights flickered. A quiet tremor passed through the floor. Nothing large, but sharp, purposeful. Derek moved fast. Nyari followed without needing to be told. He pulled up the surveillance grid. A carrier had entered low orbit. Not military. Not a government seal. Private. Corporate. He didn't recognize the transponder code, but it screamed one thing. Recovery. Not for the station. For her. They found me, she whispered. We still have time, he said. He didn't hesitate. He pulled open the gear locker, threw aside an old pack, grabbed a tool case, a heater core, a compressed oxygen rig. He moved like a man who had prepared for this without knowing it. You have a plan? She asked, almost disbelieving. I've been fixing broken systems my whole life, he said. I just never thought one of them would be you. She stared at him. And what are you going to do? Smuggle me out through a glacier? Yes. A beat of silence. Okay. They moved as one, through the old maintenance tunnels, down into the sublevel where atmospheric samples had once been collected from surface shafts now abandoned. Nyari carried the gear, while Derek opened the seal locks, bypassed failed codes, rerouted power. Sweat ran down his spine despite the cold. His hands were shaking, but not from fear. From urgency. I modified the survey skimmer, he said as they passed a frost-coated elevator shaft. She's small. Low heat profile. We can launch under their scan arc, maybe slip between their relay pings before the final sweep. Where would we go? There's a crater rim on the far side. Shielded. From there, if we boost just high enough. Derek. He stopped. Nyari stood in the blue-tinted corridor, her face calm. But her voice shook. If they catch you helping me. They won't. If they do, I'll say I fell in love with you. The words struck her like a pressure wave. He stepped toward her slow. No dramatics. Just closeness. Because I did, he said. Somewhere between your first word and your first silence. Between how you flinched and how you stopped. Somewhere in the way you never asked for kindness, but let it grow around you anyway. She stared at him, eyes wide, full of something sharp and ancient and rising too fast to stop. Then she kissed him, this time not gently, not carefully, with breathless, aching hunger. Her hands tangled in his coat, his arms wrapped around her back. It wasn't clean or perfect, it was real. Two lives wrapped around the fire of a moment that should have been impossible. A man who had nothing left to prove. A woman who had nothing left to trade. And still they gave themselves. When it ended, she rested her forehead against his. Her breath was ragged. I don't know how to survive with someone else. Then we'll learn together. The launch chamber was already freezing over by the time they reached the skimmer. Nyari climbed into the co-pilot chair as Derek activated the thrusters. The craft shook once, then settled. Outside, floodlights moved across the glacier. Derek angled the ship toward the dark horizon. They'll know we launched. Let them know, he said. And with a burst of quiet fire, they rose, low, invisible beneath the scan grid, vanishing into the sky's thinning edge. No one spoke, but Nyari reached for his hand in the dark. And this time, he didn't need to ask. She was no longer hiding, and neither was he. The ship drifted in the shadow of a fractured moon, its hull still humming from the escape burn. The cockpit was dark, lit only by the dying glow of the thrusters and the muted pulse of the life support console. Derek sat in the pilot's chair, one hand resting on the armrest, the other loosely entwined with Nyari's. She stood beside him, barefoot on the metal floor, wrapped in a thermal cloak too large for her frame. Her hair shimmered under the faint cabin light, cascading down her back like starlight reflected on black water. They hadn't spoken since the launch. There hadn't been room for words, only breath, motion, survival. Now, adrift above a forgotten planet on the edge of mapped space, they were quiet again. But it was a different kind of silence. Not fear, not hiding, just stillness. Nyari leaned her head against his shoulder, eyes half closed. She had started doing that, touching him without apology. Not for comfort, not for transaction, just presence. The NAV screen pinged. Derek sat up straighter. Atmosphere stable. Gravity tolerable. No active satellites, he muttered, reading the scan. One old outpost listed. Abandoned. Looks like we found a place to disappear. Nyari tilted her head toward the viewport. The planet below was pale and green, ringed with broken clouds. It wasn't beautiful in any traditional sense, but to her, it looked like somewhere no one would ever come looking. They entered the atmosphere quietly, heat shields engaging in a low burn. The shuttle creaked under the pressure, but held. When they landed, the light outside was dim, soft amber mist curling along the treetops. There were ruins nearby, swallowed by vines and half collapsed under time. Birds called in slow, melodic bursts. The air was thick, heavy with moisture and the scent of moss and iron. They stepped out together. Derek's boots sank into the loam. Nyari's feet were bare. She closed her eyes, tilted her head to the wind, and inhaled deeply. The heat hit her skin like a memory of the ocean. He watched her, stunned by how alive she looked here. No lights, no walls, no scanners watching. She turned to him. I never thought I'd feel air like this again. You think it's safe? He asked. No, her eyes flicked to the sky. But I think it's ours. They moved toward the outpost remains, an old supply structure, still intact in parts. Solar panels overgrown but salvageable. Water collectors rusted but functional. Derek ran diagnostics while Nyari cleared debris from what had once been a hydroponic bay. It felt less like building something new and more like remembering something ancient. That night, they sat by a makeshift heater powered by scavenged fuel cells. Derek worked a burner coil while Nyari wrapped her arms around her knees, watching the flame dance. You're not afraid anymore, he said. She looked up at him. I still am. Just not of you. He offered her a bowl of something vaguely edible, protein paste mixed with dried greens. She took it, then smiled slightly. You cook like a machine. I'm a machine. I've lived on ration bars for 3 years. Nyari leaned forward. Her voice dropped. Do you remember what I said when you found me? Derek's jaw tightened. He nodded. I'll warm your bed, she repeated softly, not mocking. Just don't leave me. That wasn't you talking. No, she said. It was survival. Instinct. Programming. She reached across the space between them, took his hand. But this, what I feel now, is mine. He turned his palm upward, fingers folding around hers. They'll come again someday, she said. You know that. I know. They'll scan. Track. Name me as property. Call this place theft. They'll be wrong. What will you say when they ask who I am? He looked into her eyes. I'll say Nyari, and that you chose me. She leaned in then, slow and deliberate, and kissed him, mouth warm, breath steady, no fear between them. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. No one's ever let me be mine. You're not anyone's, he said. You're yours. And I'm lucky you let me stay. A soft beeping interrupted them. Derek turned to the console. A signal. Faint. Unauthorized. His chest tightened. He tapped the interface. A message flickered on screen. Unregistered bioform detected. Priority asset classification. Iskari hybrid surrogate. Recovery instruction. Standby for containment. Nyari read it over his shoulder. I told you, she whispered. But Derek was already moving. His hands flew across the console. He rerouted power, engaged signal jammers, initiated a perimeter shield that wouldn't hold more than an hour. But it was something. You're not going anywhere, he said. She stepped in front of him, calm. You can't protect me from them all. No, he said, voice hardening. But I can fight long enough for you to run. I'm not running, she said. Then we hold. She nodded. Together. In the hours that followed, they fortified the outpost, linked emergency signal decoys to old orbital relays, planted false echoes in the ionosphere. Derek had never fought a war, but he knew how to rig a trap. And Nyari knew how to survive. At dawn, the sky glowed violet, and no ship came. They stood outside, watching the mist lift from the valley. For now, they had peace. For now, they had each other. And inside her, quiet as starlight, something new stirred. She pressed her hand to her stomach, not from pain, from wonder. Derek turned to her, sensing the shift. Nyari. She met his gaze. I think I'm not alone anymore. A pause. Then his eyes widened. Slowly, fully, not from fear, but from awe. And as the sun climbed over the broken treetops, they held each other in the quiet. Not captor and captive, not protector and survivor. Just man and woman. Just two hearts that had chosen to beat in the same rhythm. At last free. And finally home. They had been free for 10 days. 10 days of dawns not counted, of silence unbroken by alarms. No signals, no threats, just breath, shared work, and the slow rhythm of rebuilding. Each morning, Nyari wandered barefoot through the moss-wet grasses behind the outpost ruins. Each evening, Derek returned from the ridgeline with wire, scrap, or wood, smiling as if the world had been saved in a coil of copper. They barely spoke some days, but they didn't need to. She learned how to fix the irrigation panel with him. He learned to let her touch linger without question. Their bodies brushed casually now, wordlessly. Elbows in the greenhouse, shoulders in the galley, knees beneath shared blankets. The air between them was no longer tentative. It was home. That night it rained. Not a storm, just a hush. A warm, living drizzle that wrapped around the outpost like a whisper. The roof ticked with each drop. In the single-room shelter they'd restored from the ruins, a soft heat from the stove pulsed through the air. Nyari stood near the cot, wrapped in a woven tunic she'd fashioned from the ship's survival cloth. It hung from her like mist clinging to a stone. The firelight touched her skin, pale, blue-tinted, luminous where the rain hadn't dried her yet. Her hair lay damp over her back, curling slightly from the humidity. Derek looked up from where he knelt by the heater, adjusting the flame. Their eyes met. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She crossed the room in bare, deliberate steps. When she reached him, she knelt slowly, mirroring him, and placed her hands on his shoulders. Not urgently, not nervously. She simply chose him. He rose, and she rose with him. He reached to brush a strand of hair from her cheek, fingers trailing along the line of her jaw. Her skin was warmer than before, softer, alive in ways it hadn't been when they met. She leaned into the touch, her eyes closing just long enough to show trust. When he kissed her, she breathed in against him like it was the first clean air of her life. There was no hesitation. Her hands moved to his shirt, sliding it off his shoulders as though peeling away something heavy, something that had long hidden his warmth. He returned the gesture, slowly, his fingers trembling slightly not from lust, but from reverence. He had touched no one in years. But this wasn't about lack. It wasn't need. It was love. Quiet. Certain. Real. They undressed each other not with hunger, but with care, like explorers studying new maps, following unseen roads in the skin. When she pressed her bare chest against his, their breath caught in the same moment. Her hands ran down his spine. His lips found the pulse in her throat. He whispered her name. Once. She pulled him toward the cot, guiding with her eyes more than her voice. She lay back on the woven blanket, the dim orange firelight casting her body in soft, glistening curves. Her eyes never left his. She opened her legs, not an offering, not an invitation, in welcome. And when he moved between them, it wasn't sudden. It was slow, like water settling into the shape of what it had always been meant to hold. His hands framed her hips. Her thighs wrapped around his waist. The moment they joined, Nyari inhaled sharply, her fingers gripping his forearms. Her body arched, not in pain, but in revelation. This wasn't the mechanical rhythm she'd been conditioned for. This was hers. He didn't move quickly. He waited. Let her adjust. Let her guide. And when she whispered yes, it came from somewhere deep, somewhere unburied. They moved together like the sea, gentle, rhythmic, rising, crashing, retreating, and returning. She moaned into his mouth, fingers tangled in his hair. He held her like she was fragile, like he was grateful, like every breath was a vow. It wasn't just their bodies that tangled. It was something older, something holy. When it ended, they didn't part. He stayed inside her, forehead resting against hers, his breath quiet and shaking, her slow and deep. Tears slipped down her temples, caught in her hairline. He kissed them without asking why. And when he pulled the blanket around them, she curled into him without fear. Their hands stayed clasped on her stomach, resting gently over the place where new life stirred, small and unseen. She whispered against his throat, "Now I know what it means." He looked down at her. What does? To belong. Outside, the rain softened. Inside, they lay still, skin against skin, pulse against pulse. No promises. No futures planned. Just this. Now. Together.